Man's legacy is determined by how he governs his household. If he is one to oppose the rules of the system, then his offspring will follow in his shoes, as one would say. But if he has resolved in his mind to follow the laws of the land and train his descendants to do the same, then he will leave a mark on society that may be relished by all mankind. In the next series of lessons or sessions, we will see the legacy that is left by Adam and Eve, and we will see how Yahweh deals with the generations following Adam and Eve. Hello, I'm Dr. Ray, and welcome to this week's Hosea International Speaks. This next division of the book of Genesis is called the section of Noah. And remember, this one actually begins in Genesis chapter 6, verse 8. But we will start the lesson in Genesis 5 and then continue into chapter 6. Remember, we divided the book of Genesis into 12 different sections, or should I say, the Jewish Bible is divided that way for the book of Genesis. And what we will begin to see in this portion of Scripture is man's attempt to rectify all wrong and to approach Yahweh. We saw Cain's and Abel's attempt to fill a void that was created by sin. Abel's offering was accepted by Yahweh, but remember, Cain's was not. And because of that, we saw the first murder or the first spilling of innocent blood. Remember, Adam's attempt to fill the void that was created by him was to try and cover their nakedness by using fig leaves. The word naked means to be destitute, to be stripped of clothing to the skin and carefully watched. The stripping of the glory of Yahweh. No doubt the phrase watching was done probably from both sides by Yahweh and Satan. And because man did not deal with the sin that was crouching at the door, that is Cain, the enemy began to sink his teeth into him with deception and death. Note what Genesis chapter 5:3 says. And Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in, notice the phrase, his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. Adam had been created, remember, in the likeness and in the image of Yahweh. But now Adam's offspring was in his likeness and image, and not in the likeness and image of Yahweh. Chapter 6 gives us a sequence of events from man multiplying on the face of the earth till the iniquity that began, it also began to increase. The wickedness, according to Scripture, was so severe that Yahweh had to relay to the man, relay to him, my spirit will not strive with you forever. Yahweh was saying that he was not going to be in strife with man because of their iniquity. He would just soon as remove himself. The picture that is painted here is that the door of life was being closed. He is saying that I will no longer be able to provide life for a people who are constantly at odds with me. I will no longer be able to provide the door of life. I will not allow the restoration life to operate. That's why one of the announcements or discourses of Jesus was in John chapter 10, verse 17 and following. He says this, I am the door. Jesus was restoring the way back to Yahweh. He was reopening the door to life that had been shut. So in Genesis chapter 6, what Yahweh was communicating to man was the door to life, or the door to provision and protection, was closing. The door to sustenance was being closed. Man's access to the door of life would be hidden from him for a season, for a kairos of time. The door to the sheepfold was closing. It would be obscured until the appointed time, the kairos of time. Yahweh would no longer perpetuate himself through man. And because of the condition of man, Yahweh chose not to be in strife with his creation. Man would now be operating and reacting out of the flesh and not according to the Spirit. Man had allowed the chaos and the calamities and the pressures of life to dictate to him. Every intent or the thoughts of his heart was only evil. Notice what it says in Scripture, only evil continually. Man had begun to exercise his authority by using it to direct other men and move them, other men, in a different direction than what Yahweh had intended. Man began to replace himself for Yahweh. Man had begun to become unequally yoked, as you would say, that they may, as man would understand it in those terms if he could, but man would begin to communicate with those not of the same calling or values or even the same customs. From this point, Yahweh could not communicate according to the Spirit. So he would have to communicate outside of the Spirit according to man's flesh. He would have to find a man to relay his intent. And Yahweh's intent was to destroy the earth. The Scripture says this of this man that God chose, and Noah found grace in the eyes of Yahweh. The Scripture continues to speak of Noah as being a just man, perfect in his generation, and that he walked with Yahweh. You can see that in Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. We're going to get a little in greater depth next week, so as to why Yahweh decided to destroy his creation and the man he chose to bring a temporary solution to the situation. If you enjoyed this week's session, which was brief, go ahead and hit the like button, and if you wish, go ahead and if you want to be notified, go ahead and hit the subscribe button right about there. And also, if you also want to communicate with me, you can, or questions you may ask, you can go ahead and write me at hoseainternational@yahoo.com or hoseaintspeaks@gmail.com. And as you can see from my video, we're at a different location, and we will continue to bring these teachings weekly from this new location, or should I say we're down under visiting my daughter in Australia. So I'm Dr. Ray, and we will see you next week on Hosea International Speaks.